Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists absolutely got it correct. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. Once again, I'm delighted that we are together today and that you have the insights of what the mirrors of history can bring to you. And that's the intentions of this program continuously, is to do so. Last week, we talked about the idea of what it would be for Christian nationalism. I made some references for you to follow in respect to Doug Wilson's. I didn't know he had an interview. I didn't even make that link with, what was that, some news network and all that was going on. I just saw the post on Christian nationalism, and that's something that I've talked about for years upon years, is that foundationally that is how our republic is supposed to function, is with a moral and virtuous people. That's Christian nationalism. But no, instead we have the likes of the Biden regime, and now it is definitely equivalent to what is going on in Venezuela, Maduro, and every other third world nation. It was predictable. The anti-federalists predicted it. They absolutely predicted it. So, with that being said, as we're closing in now to October and the last month of opportunity to understand who your candidates are, who you're voting for, we're way beyond the opportunities to, number one, develop candidates, which we should have been doing for the last 20 years. We should have been developing moral and virtuous candidates at every level of governance. School boards, dog catcher, city council, counties, you name it. Any elected office, we should have been doing what the founders wanted. Sam Adams talks about it over and over again, is that we raise up citizens that know how to self-govern and then become part of a governing body. Well, this week, I want to talk to you about vetting candidates before giving your suffrage. Kind of late for it in some ways, but there are those last minute venues that are going on out there where people are having their candidate forums, their last minute debates, all of their little parties, if you will, trying to, we're going to bring in the Democrat candidate, the Republican, and if there's an independent, maybe. Mostly unlikely. Well, there's a lot of problems with that, as I've spoken about for over, now it's 12 years, going back to 2009, 2010, when we set up an exemplary candidate vetting program at We the People in Vancouver, Washington, Clark County, Washington, and then all over the whole state of Washington. What I am going to discuss today is both what is suffrage. We're suffering now because of people exercising their suffrage. We're suffering in a manner that we can use that from the term of pain, and how we are being inflicted with everything that is contrary to founders' original intent for our governing mechanisms, our constitutionalism. So we're going to talk about the vetting process a little bit, what it is, how it could function, my top vetting perspective, which nobody does. Nobody. Maybe somebody out there. I can't say nobody, but not anybody that I know. That's for sure. We're also going to talk about the historical perspective of suffrage. We're going to do that not only from Sam Adams' point of view and some of the issues that were run into at the time, but also from another founding father that was there both at the Congress, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. He's a signer of the Declaration of Independence as well as a signer of the Constitution. In the second segment, I'm going to be talking about the Ohio Constitutional Convention. We have all this stuff running around on the Federal Constitutional Convention, and quite frankly, it is a disaster. And anyone that is promoting it are utter manipulative fools that want the destruction of this nation. And I really hope, because I'm going to put, and I did put in the search results or in the metadata for Mark Levin is in the metadata, so that he hears this, because he needs to change his mind, because he's got a great influence on people. And if you want to take and look at what I'm going to be discussing in the second segment, which was facilitated by the fact that I do hold study sessions on the Ohio Constitution, what happened with the Ohio the Ohio Constitutional Convention of 1912, is the utter example of destructive people, mechanisms, and ideas that have far-reaching results to this very day. The debacle of government in Ohio is going all the way back to 1912 and those that were involved in the Constitutional Convention of 1912. I don't know how to be more emphatic than saying that is the prime example of why we cannot ever allow a federal constitutional convention. And I'm going to discuss that more in the second segment. But first off, let's roll back a little bit and talk about candidate vetting and your suffrage and some of what is important even in developing candidates. But I want to take you back all the way to what we developed this goes all the way back to 2009, and what happened then in the midterms for 2011 and 12. What is vetting anyway? So vetting really comes from and derives from horse racing, where the veterinarian goes in and checks out and evaluates the horses. They want to make sure that they're healthy. They want to make sure that they're in good condition so that they can run the race. So horses with physical problems may not be able to participate because of the risk to the horse itself and the rider. And certainly what they do is they do blood tests to try and find out if there is anything chemically wrong with the horses, or that the horses have been given steroids or other types of enhancement drugs. Well, in modern times, the enhancement drug for candidates is what? Money. Enhancement drug for candidates is money. And that comes from all of these various lobbyists, all these different groups. So the biggest drug out there for candidates is money. The second one is power and the promises of prestige. Power and prestige. So vetting in the political realm, no different than horse races, is that the political candidate needs to get elected, to win. But in doing that, when you start thinking about all of these different races, especially in the state level and the federal level, look at all the emotionalism that's tied to that. Look at all those that are betting on those candidates, those that are taking and throwing the money, who are funding them. Look at all the money from the Zuckerbucks. Look at all the Soros money. Look at everything that goes on. And you sit there and we are frustrated with it at a minimum. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the second segment when we talk about the Ohio Constitution and the corruption that we're seeing now. As you noticed, maybe, is that there was a resolution brought forward by the Republicans to take and investigate Hunter Biden and to get all of the documentation on the Biden's private businesses in relationship to the ties of foreign governments. And the Democrats shot that all down. They shot it all down. Well, guess what? That's the power play. That's all that's going on back there. So when somebody's trying to get elected, we want to vet them. We want to examine them. We want to get into their background. We want to analyze for either falsehoods that might be going on. We want to know what happened if they are already in office. How did they vote? What did they do? We want to know those that are running for office, what really qualifies them to do so. In Ohio, we had several candidates running for governor that had zero qualifications to run for governor, in my opinion. Telling a good story does not mean that you're qualified to hold that type of position. So other than what's going on, we have to look at that scrutiny. We have to really dig in to looking at what are their liabilities and their strong points. But I'm going to kind of give you a little moment of my top view. Something that we necessarily did not do back in that 2009-2010 time frame when we were taking and vetting candidates back in Washington State. But what I prescribe now, and I definitely will carry over into the third segment and pick up with, the candidates, especially for senior state and federal positions, for governor, for secretary of state, for any of the senior administrative positions, even at county levels. I want to know, and you should want to know, everything that we can about that person individually, but more so, who is behind them? Who are they connected to? Who are their attorneys? Who are the lobbying groups they're associated with or their attorneys are associated with? Who is their staff? Who are the staffers? Where are they coming from? What policies are they already writing? Because the first day in office, these people end up, especially as governors, signing executive orders and implementing administrative policy. Where'd that come from? Who did it? Who put it together for them? Who's behind it? We'll follow up with more of that in the third segment, But come on back when Samuel Adams returns, and we talk now in the second segment about the state of Ohio and the pending constitutional convention. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it absolutely correct. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and we're going to jump right into it. Now, it's very interesting, and many people, most citizens, in fact, have no clue, no idea, no understanding that their states do take and often require them to review their state constitutions. We're going to talk about Ohio specifically here, but I want to give you a couple of insights on some particular states. And there's 14 states in general out of the 50 states, or who was it? Biden, or that said that there were, 52 states, 51 states? Who knows what the left wants to predict. Anyhow, out of this, here is the facts from Ballotpedia. You can go look and see that every 10 years, Alaska is to call a question as to whether to hold a convention to automatically be placed on the ballot. It automatically goes to the ballot every 10 years in Alaska, calling the question of whether or not to have a constitutional convention. Iowa is the same thing every 10 years. New Hampshire is 10 years. Theirs is a little bit different. Rhode Island is every 10 years as well, is to put it on the ballot to do that. Hawaii is 10 years, and there's all that information there itself. 16 years, every 16 years, Michigan has that in their constitution to call the question to hold a constitutional convention. It's automatic. It has to appear on the state ballot every 16 years. So Michigan voters will look at it again in 2026 when we look at that. Every 20 years is like Connecticut. Connecticut will occur again in 2028. Illinois just had one most recently in 2008, so 2008 in Illinois, so theirs will be in 2028. Maryland also will have theirs the next time in 2030. Missouri, theirs last one was held in 2002, so their question should automatically be on their ballots for this year. Montana's is established in such a way that it's whether to hold that shall be automatically goes on the ballot every 20 years. So Montana, the last time was in 2010, so theirs will be in 2030. New York, now this one's very interesting. So the last time that it was on the ballot was in 2017 in New York. So that should be coming up in 20 years, will be 2037 for them. Now, Ohio, well, let me skip Ohio because we're going to stay focused on Ohio. Oklahoma, their last time, they're every 20 years, and theirs isn't automatic. The last time Oklahoma voted on the question was in 1970, and they have the ability to look at it from the legislature's perspective. So the legislature determines that. Whereas, now we'll go to Ohio. In Ohio's we have here is that Ohio in Article 16, Section 3, it states that question of constitutional convention to be submitted periodically. So it was amended such that at a general election to be held in the year 1932 and in each 20th year thereafter, the question Shall there be a convention to revise, alter, or amend the Constitution? Shall be submitted to the electors of the state, and in case a majority of electors voting for and against the calling of a convention shall decide in favor of a convention, the General Assembly at its next session shall provide by law for the election of delegates and the assembling of such convention as it provided in the preceding sections, but no amendment of this Constitution agreed upon by any convention assembled is in pursuance of this article shall take effect until the time shall have been submitted to the electors of the state and adopted by a majority of those voting thereon. So what I want to bring to you is a little historical bit that I have done for the Ohio Constitutional Study Group. In the Ohio Constitution from 2012, it was rejected. So let me cover that real quick. Is that that question to call a constitutional convention, when it was looked at the full ballot language, people apparently understood it clearly, and it lost 68% to 31.92 of all of those that voted for it. Now, the interesting aspect of this is that it was a total of about, 4.7 plus million people that voted. 3,248,142 were against it, said no. 523,239 voted for it, voted yes. Very, very interesting. You'll have to go look at that information. But when we take a look what happened in 1912, based on the population at that time and based on all the various things that were going on at that time, a convention was called in 1912. 298,460 people voted yes, which was 58.32%, whereas 213,337, being 41.68%, voted no. Very interesting statistically on that margin, that spread of numbers of those that voted either way. Now, what happened during that convention was then what came out of it, in fact, were 42 provisions, 42 amendments. So the 1851 Constitution for the state of Ohio was extremely lean. It was very, very lean. And I'm going to mention a document here shortly, but the convention of 1912, they had 42 measures that went to the ballot. There were a number that were rejected, and those that were rejected, you can look, there's a link in the newsletter that you should get, or if you don't get it, sign up for it at samueladamsreturns.net. And you can go there at samueladamsreturns.net to see this link of all of these amendments to the 1851 Constitution. I'm not going to get into those in detail. What I want to talk to you about is a little bit that I brought forward in the session that I did on Thursday night from a individual's doctoral paper on the 1912 Constitutional Convention. I'm going to kind of interject here and give you some summaries, is that the idea of these folks that brought this question forward, They said that they were quoting from Thomas Jefferson in his dictum that no law should be in effect longer than a generation, roughly 20 years, unless reenacted. So that should be with law. Now, I have not gone back to the Ohio Revised Code to determine if there is that sunset of 20 years on the majority of the laws, because there should be if they truly followed that dictum. But instead, what happened was that in 1910, the voters took and they looked at it and they said, oh yeah, we want to have a constitutional convention. But why? Here's the questions that this gentleman asks in his paper. He asks, what created the demand for the constitutional changes in 1910 to 1912? What was the character of the convention? Was it dominated by extremists either on the right or left? A fear expressed by those opposing a call today, which is true. You should be afraid of extremists on both sides of whatever your political position is. Then, what were its objectives and how successfully were they realized? What educational value did it have for the people of the state? Very critical questions, very critical questions. So let me put it this way. And we're going to leave off just at the very beginning of this document. And the link is there at samueladamsreturns.net for you to check out as well, is that they looked at advancing the time frame from 2010 to 2011. And both Republicans and Democrats both endorsed this whole idea of doing it. And they certified a special statute to allow that to happen. Then the people overwhelmingly voted to allow it to happen. 693,000 people compared to 67,000. Well, let me get down to the influences on some of what brought it about. At this time, it was put in, and the study shows it was psychologically proper. It was the most favorable psychological time to have the convention. The conservatives as well as progressives, which now is a new label for radical advocates of change, which had just come into popular parlance, determined the moment was at hand to strike for their pet panaceas. Urban capitalists, led by the Ohio State Board of Commerce, wanted to rewrite the taxation article of 1851 in order to abolish the rule of taxing all property, tangible and intangible, at an uniform rate and to permit classification. You see, the businesses were, the Ohio Board of Commerce. And then on top of that, the liquor interests sought to eliminate the constitutional injunctions, but more so, most important, were the demands of the progressives, which had accumulated over the past decade for such varied reforms as municipal home rule, direct primaries, the initiative and referendum, equal suffrage, improvements of the court system, and procedures and legal protection for workers. The progressives put the pressure on the most. And this was because of what was going on in other states with all the unionization and that of the reforms of the likes of Woodrow Wilson in New Jersey and Hiram Johnson in California. Watch out. And worse is that the Ohioan reformers found their inspiration from the teachings of Henry George and Henry Damaris Lloyd. Henry George, I've talked about a number of times. I speak about him in my book. And I'm telling you, when you look at this and you look at this paper, Ohio became the legislative mess that it is because of the changes in its constitution in 1912. And once again, here we are. We're looking at one now in 2023 or 2024. What will the voters of Ohio decide in regards to a constitutional convention? watch out. The progressives, the communists, are worse than they were in 1912. Come on back for the third segment when we pick up once again on vetting candidates and your suffrage. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. The Anti-Federalist got it correct. This is Tom Navolis, your host. I highly suggest that you sign up for the newsletter that only comes out once a week unless there's really some hot topics that I am believing you need to get the information on from those mirrors of history. And that can be done at samueladamsreturns.net. It gives you the opportunity not only to find this week's program archived there, but also the opportunity to sign up for a newsletter and look at previous programs. Once again, I am going to keep reminding you, in particular in the Kansas City market, that as of February, we will no longer be in your market. And I am taking the hint that it doesn't matter whether we're here or not on the radio network that we are in Kansas City, because I've not heard from anybody there, nor have we seen anybody helping to financially defer the cost to be in that market. So with that, I want to get back to the idea of vetting candidates and suffrage. But let me finish off for you in Missouri in particular, is that you should, or I would suspect you should, be having a ballot question about a constitutional convention. Because as I mentioned in the second segment and talked in detail, but I'm going to give it to you because I'm not sure that you're going to go to samueladamsreturns.net and either listen to the whole podcast there or watch the video so you can get the second segment. And in that, what it says here is that's what's established in Article 12, Section 3A of the Missouri Constitution, is that a question about whether to hold a constitutional convention is to automatically appear on the state's ballot every 20 years. This began in 1942, and that it has subsequently been accomplished every 20 years henceforth. The last time that you had that question on your ballot there in Missouri is in 2002. So the suspect would be that it would be on your ballot in 2022 if we do basic math. If those of the last generation learn to do basic math. So with that, I wanted to give you that heads up there in Missouri so that you have that opportunity to survey your ballots and see if, in fact, the Missouri Constitution is being adhered to and that question comes about. Now, you have to go to the second segment to understand about Ohio, but Missouri has the same problems, if you will, that Ohio did as to your Constitution is a mess, and therefore legislatively you're a mess, just like Ohio's a mess, for all the obvious reasons. With that, I wanted to get into Sam Adams a little bit on suffrage, but vetting, I wanted to finish from segment 1, is that the primary question. And if you're really interested in vetting candidates, contact me at tom@samueladamsreturns.com to ask questions about vetting. The process is deep, requires a team to actually put effort into doing candidate vetting, not these hokey-pokey candidate nights. That's not vetting. That's allowing them to give their elevator speeches, and to me, it's useless. There's no value in it whatsoever. Big deal. They show up at your meetings, whether it's a patriot meeting, a political meeting, whatever meeting it is. It's useless. All they're going to do is spew their same old stuff. And any of the questions, they'll song and dance them. They won't answer them. So if you want to know about real vetting candidates, once again, contact me at tom@samueladamsreturns.com. The key question, and I'm going to leave vetting with this. The key question in vetting is, yes, understanding who the candidate is, their voting record, if they're already an incumbent, blah, blah, blah. The key question is, who are the staff? Who is the chief of staff, especially for any federal or state executive offices, governor, secretary of state, the attorney general, the treasurer, anything that is those key offices. Any of the key offices must be queried about what's under the skirts of the candidate. Open the kimono as to who is who in their zoo. If we don't know who the who in their zoo is, you're never, ever, ever going to understand how they will govern. Because it's them that may put their signature to the papers, but who develops the policy? Who are they going to place as a governor into the various positions that they have the ability to appoint? Who are they? That will tell you how they will govern. Without knowing that, you don't know anything. So all you're doing is you're taking and, going blindfold, getting the 3 to 5 spins, and go pin the tail on the donkey. That's all you got. So that's my nut on that one. Now, let's get to suffrage. I'm going to take you back a little bit in history here, just real quick, because in 1776 there was a terrible issue that was going on with Parliament, and once again, even the king, in respect to the differences between what was legal within the context of the charters of the colonies and what all of the political opposition in England was saying about the colonies. What the political opposition with the king and Parliament's operatives in the colonies were all about. And this was in relationship to giving the vote, your suffrage. Suffrage is, by definition, where you are to intelligently, well-researched, ascend or agree with the people that you are going to have represent you, because they are acting as your agent. And many times I talk about that we are underrepresented in the United States Congress because there's no way one person can represent 1.2, 1.5 million people. Nor is there any way within the context of the Senate that you're going to represent a whole state between two people. There you don't. We built oligarchies now. So anyway, Sam Adams was in dealing with this in 1776. The arguments were going back and forth. Some of the things that he said here is that we were summoned and convened here to give our free suffrages at the general election, directed to be annually made by the royal charter. So they were chartered to do that. We have given our suffrages according to the dictates of our consciences and the best light of our understanding. It was certainly our right to choose, and as clearly constitutional power in your excellency to disprove without assigning a reason either before or after your dissent. So what happened was they were electing people, and both the governor, the people of the colonies, the people of Massachusetts colony in particular, were electing people, and both the governor, the appointee of the king, and the king himself were saying, no, you can't have those people. Those aren't the people that can come into office. And so that was a violation of the royal charter. And worse, as we well know, is that there was no representation in the context of Parliament in the lower house. So what we had within our governing bodies was self-sustaining governing bodies within the colonies that were given by charter to be able to do so. So our suffrage is free. Our suffrage is to take, and it provides the ability to make the decisions on how we're going to be governed. And how is it in the House of Assembly that they would receive our suffrage at that time? And they argued. I mean, it was a big deal where they kept pressing against and saying, no, we're not going to certify this. And they were asserting all what they called their legal powers over the colonies in respect to that. So Sam Adams talks about again in 1766, as to us, as our charter is, we should think it of very little value if it should be adjudged that the sense and spirit of it requires the electors should be under the absolute direction and control of the chair, even in giving their suffrages. So what he was talking about here was that if, say, the Speaker of the House, for instance, in the state of Ohio, tells the elected how they're going to vote, no different than they do in the federal Congress with their caucuses and all of that. So the Freedom Caucus is the free-thinking caucus, both at a state level as well as at the federal level. But no different than in our time right now, the difficulty could be those that would be easily persuaded by the agents of manipulation, the agents of the government, the agents of the king, the agents of the governor, the agents of the Speaker of the House, the agents of the political party, to dissuade those elected who are supposed to be representing we the people, not to vote according to what is going on in the needs and perceived needs of people and what the people are bringing forward to their representative. No. What was going on in 1766 was exactly what's going on now, is that those in political power were dictating how the vote should go. I don't have all the time to take you into all of this through the collected works of James Wilson, but I made in the introduction the idea that James Wilson was both the signer of the Declaration of Independence as well as the Constitution. He was a Federalist in so many different ways. He, in the collected works of James Wilson, Volume 1, takes and goes through a historical perspective of elections even in Great Britain at the time. And he goes through and he talks about a number of different aspects of being qualified to vote. And the qualification was definitely contained within those that owned property and not were dependent on the government or dependent on some, because the vote would be corrupted. They'd always go with who is taking care of them, that being the government. We see that so much today. He says this in one point: a candidate may recommend himself at his election by recounting the many successful instances in which he has sacrificed the interests of America to those of Great Britain. A member of the House of Commons may plume himself upon the ingenuity in inventing schemes to serve the mother country at the expense of the colonies, and may boast of their important resentment against him on that account. He says a lot about elections and suffrage and what that has to do with we the people, and that the theory about that, and the fact that elections always should be for the first magistrates, those in your state and at the federal level, a direct operation of the people. But as we know, political parties often design who they want. But that gets into the whole idea of actually raising up moral and virtuous candidates, as well as knowing how to vet them. So I want you to think about that. And if you have any questions on vetting, I will say again, contact me at tom@samueladamsreturns.com. Come on back next week when Sam Adams returns. The Anti-Federalists got it right, and we'll see all the fun stuff that's happening in our country. See you next week. Thanks.